Dot Hill,
Hey,
do you remember your first visit to the library?
no, I can't say that I remember a first visit, but I remember coming as a young child with my mother. And that was when the library was located down a narrow lane behind the Hustings building, which has since been torn down to make parking space for the present Courthouse Museum building. And it was a long walk down that little alleyway to the library, and the library itself was not very wide. I think it was just one room wide, and it went on and on and on, kind of from one room to another, or back considerably. And that was in the days when there was a librarian by the name of Miss Essie Wilson, and my mother would go there quite often. She had come to Portsmouth to teach school in 1913, I believe it was, and the library opened very shortly after that, and her card number was 13. And when she came, she would always get a handful of books, 4 and 5 at a time, and because she was an avid reader. But she wanted the books to be, quote, clean, as she called them, and if they had anything that she considered smut or any ugly words or any profanity, she would bring it right back, and she would give the librarian or whoever was at the desk, she would give them a hard lecture about how she didn't like that book and she wasn't going to read it.
That's funny. So that's the thing that you really remember the most about the library.
Yes.
Is the
Yes.
difficulty in getting down that long hallway.
Well, I don't know whether it was so difficult, but it just seemed to me as a young child that it was a long journey to get to the library. Mm-hmm. And of course we lived in what was then part of Norfolk County, and I went to a county school in Churchland, and so I had no experience with the library other than coming with my mother for many a year, because we used the library at school, and then I was away at school, and it wasn't until after I was married and came back here to live that I got a library card of my own. And I finally remember it was number 6789, and I love that number, because it was so easy to remember. Only I lost it at some point in time, and they refused to give me the same number again. I got a computer-generated number, and I'll never remember what that was.
So most of your visits were favorable?
Oh, yes. It was always a nice little journey for me to come with my mother. And yes, and I remember my mother always having such a nice, pleasant conversation, for the most part, unless it was a book she thought was smut.
Right.
So,
do you remember any of the other staff besides Miss Essie Wilson?
well, of course, Miss Kirkpatrick came in time, but it seems to me that there was another woman who worked there with Miss Wilson was there by the name of Smith, Dorothy Smith, someone like that. She may have been a volunteer, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But yes, there were some other people in there from time to time, but I just don't remember the names. Yeah.
Well, this question is not on the sheet, but it does bring to mind that when I first started working at Churchland, your mother was a frequent visitor out at the Churchland branch.
Right.
Do you remember when the Churchland branch opened and she started going there? Was it sometime in the late 50s, early 60s?
Oh, I think it may have been later than that. See, my father died in '69, and she immediately moved downtown to an apartment. And it was a nice little excursion for her to get in the car and drive out to Churchland, and frequently stop at the Circle to eat, and she would have a friend with her. So she began going out to Churchland. Mm-hmm. I know around to '69, and maybe sooner, but I think it probably mostly came about after my father's death.
And see, I started February 1970, and that was when Mrs. Virginia Hall, who mm-hmm. was the first librarian out there
right.
at Churchland Branch Library, was working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
right.
And I used to see your mother frequently.
Oh, yes.
Yep, I remember number 13.
Right. Yeah, she had a little bag she'd put those books in to carry back and forth to the library. Yep, yep.
So how long have you been a library patron?
Well, of course, I am not living within the city limits now, but I suppose my affiliation goes back to about 48. Then I got a card, I'll put it that way. And I've later served on the board here at the
Right.
library, which was very, very meaningful to my, I got quite interested then.
And why do you keep visiting?
Well, books are just such a very important part of my life. And I know we're getting away from the printed word, but there's something about having a book in your hand that, it's very comforting in many ways. And there's just so much to learn and so much to enjoy in the printed word. And so I suppose I have been conditioned, as many of my generation have been, so that we will never be like the younger kids are today with being very comfortable with a printed book that they can handle in front of them. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your memories with us. And we look forward to seeing you at our celebration for the 100th. And have a great day.